Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our TZD Traffic Safety Hot Dish. I am Catherine Diamond. I am the Division Director for the Division of Injury Prevention and Mental Health at the Minnesota Department of Health, and I'm excited to be moderating this hot dish today. Today, our topic is cannabis education and prevention efforts in traffic safety. And this is a really interesting topic. I think it's very new, it's developing. We're all still figuring it out, but with the new legalization of cannabis, we're figuring out that balance of promoting safe use for those who can use cannabis, and also figuring out what the guardrails are around it and how we can work to make sure that our roadways and transportation systems remain safe with this new substance that is now in our state. And we want to recognize our sponsors. Our hosts today. We have the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, the Minnesota Department of Health, the Minnesota Department of Public Safety, and the Minnesota Department of Transportation. Before we start, we want to make sure that you know that this webinar is being recorded and that all attendees are muted, and we will have some space and opportunities for Q&A. You'll be able to find several useful items on the Minnesota TZD website after today's webinar, including the PDH form for continuing education credits and a recording of today's webinar. Video and audio for all participants is turned off, but you can communicate with the speakers or other participants using the chat and the Q&A boxes at the bottom of your screen. Please use the chat feature to introduce yourself, share ideas with all participants, or to let us know if you are having AV or IT issues. Use the Q&A feature if you have a question for our speaker, and I'll keep an eye on that, and we have a couple other helpers that are here that can keep an eye on it. If it's relevant and easy to answer in the moment, I may share it with the speaker during their presentation. Otherwise, we should have plenty of time for questions after our speakers are done. We have multiple speakers today, so you'll be hearing from various people on different topics around this. Jade will share details on the Cannabis Aware website that was created by MDH. Following her presentation, Dave Buxom and Shannon Grabow will talk about marketing and messaging underway through the Minnesota Department of Public Safety. And then we'll end with Sarah McGreary-DeHaan and Bill Vancouvering sharing examples of tools they use during public education activities across our state. We'll take clarifying questions after each presentation, but you can hold general questions until the end, and you can always type them into the Q&A box as we go through the presentations too. So we will start with Jade Hipp. She is the Communications Coordinator in the Substance Use Prevention, Education, and Recovery Unit at MDH. She leads strategic health communication initiatives, advancing youth education on cannabis, alcohol, opioids, and other drugs through culturally relevant messaging. Jade will be talking about the new Be Cannabis Aware campaign, which aims to share facts about cannabis and empower our youth that it's okay to say no. So I will pass it over to Jade.
Alrighty, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for this time and space today to share a little bit about the Be Cannabis Aware campaign here at MDH. And then I'll also talk a little bit just kind of about some ongoing projects that we have in the works regarding youth cannabis education. So without further ado, we'll get started. So there were a number of factors at play that led to Be Cannabis Aware and are kind of driving our ongoing communications efforts. The main one being legalization, which I'm sure is driving much of our work here around adult use cannabis in Minnesota. The second driver comes from legislation that was passed that directed MDH to lead a longer term coordinated effort to raise public awareness around substance misuse prevention, treatment, and recovery. And within that legislation, so you can see here, I called out subdivision 1 in particular. That is the piece of the statute that relates to youth and young adults. So that is what my team is currently working on. But we have a number of teams at MDH who are working with various audiences, including pregnancy, breastfeeding, and chest feeding, and then also collaborating with our local public health and tribal health partners. So all of that really great work is happening, and we're collaborating together across teams. And then additionally, we had a work group at MDH that was kind of assessing and doing an environmental scan internally and externally with partners to see what some needs were around substance use prevention as a result of cannabis now becoming legalized. And so that's where we heard about this immediate need for youth cannabis education messaging. So, in addition to having this longer term project underway, we also wanted to address this immediate need and fill the gap. So, therefore, we decided to launch a short term campaign, which we now call Be Cannabis Aware, to provide cannabis use prevention and education. We did not go through a traditional RFP process for this work. Instead, we leveraged the use of a state-approved vendor list that we have through our management and budget office, which allowed us to streamline our contracting process and have a more rapid project initiation. And so we did decide to work with 6 different vendors for this work, and they've all been amazing to partner with. And to align with the legislation, we did decide to use that youth and a young adult audience as our primary audience. We get a lot of questions around why we chose to do 25 years and younger. That comes directly from the legislation, and we do know that our brains are developing until around age 25. So it's a really important age group to be equipping with the tools and the facts they need to make informed health decisions. And then also, we wanted to loop in a secondary audience of influential adults, realizing that adults have a huge role to play in influencing the health and well-being of our young people. So we have messaging and resources tailored to adults as well. And the campaign objectives, again, go back to the legislation around creating that general public awareness around the misuse of cannabis. And we wanted to help young Minnesotans proactively choose not to use cannabis. And instead of just simply saying, don't do it, we wanted to focus on that why not and tying into how non-use can help to foster future goals or personal aspirations that may be really important to our youth. So when we were beginning this project, we had a number of subject matter experts at MDH do some research to see what other state campaigns currently existed. We met with other states to learn their kind of key takeaways or lessons learned, and kind of get a better understanding at the different approaches they took and core topic areas they decided to focus on. And then also leaned on public health messaging best practices as they relate to youth substance use prevention, which we found a number of themes come up time and time again. A big one being to avoid any stigmatizing language or shaming or blaming of youth, but instead have our approach rooted in empowerment, and again, equipping our youth to make informed health decisions. And so I pulled out just 5 kind of common themes that came about that are really important in having when you're developing messaging for youth is to have information that's science-based. We want to be credible, so using near peer resources when possible. I know that gets a little tricky when you're a state agency or an authority figure of sorts, but doing our best to really elevate those lived experiences of our communities, Be open, again, tying in that empowerment piece for our youth. Pertinent, so showing the consequences that matter to teens. They're really interested in learning about how cannabis can impact brain function and structure. And then lastly, being empathetic, so acknowledging that our youth are facing many challenges, and ensuring that they feel understood and valued. So, with our 6 vendors, we were really grateful that we got to hold some focus groups when we were trying to develop our campaign concept and do some message development. Nika Creative was kind of our vendor who was project managing the campaign work for us, and they were able to hold a focus group back in May with 12 students from North Hennepin Community College. And they were presented with 4 concepts up on the board, and there was one clear favorite, which was Be Open. And I'll talk a little bit more about that here in a bit. But through the concepts, we overall had really great feedback. Participants said that they could see themselves in the messaging. They felt a sense of individuality and empowerment. The information was informational without being judgmental. And they tend to appeal more to the concepts that had maybe brighter colors or a more hopeful look and feel to them. And then lastly, they did say that the concepts felt inspiring and did motivate them or foster this curiosity to go check out the website and learn more. We had another focus group that our vendor Ku Consulting hosted and facilitated with 11 Southeast Asian youth and young adults. This had reinforced many of the themes that we found through our research of surveying other state campaigns, and again, those best practices in public health messaging. The students from this focus group really valued the more conversational and positive messaging approach, as well as they had a huge interest on cannabis's impact on stress and mental health. So we wanted to be sure to loop in some of that mental health piece into our messaging moving forward. They recommended using TikTok and Instagram as key platforms for reaching young audiences. And then also mentioned to us that the need for cannabis education was really there, and that there's a lot of misconceptions that exist around cannabis. So it's important to equip young people with the facts so that we can combat those misconceptions. So moving forward, we did decide to go with Be Open based off of the youth feedback we received. And we do apply that concept in our messaging across the youth audience as well as our influential adults, but it just kind of slightly has a different spin on it. So for our youth tailored resources, it's inspiring knowledge about the short and long-term effects of cannabis, even for those who might be using. The topic areas that we decided to focus on, again, based off of the youth feedback we received. We're focusing on facts and dangers, talking about peer pressure, and then also highlighting ways to cope. So, kind of getting at that mental health piece that was mentioned, and then providing resources. For adults, this kind of shifts to more of that frame on having inspiring adults to have those brave conversations about cannabis with youth in their lives. So again, still talking about the facts and dangers, we do loop in some messages around safe storage tips, and then how to talk with youth around cannabis and substances, since we know that's a really tricky thing for any adult to do. And so how can you approach that with understanding and compassion? And then lastly, providing resources. So, as I mentioned, in September, we were super excited to launch Be Cannabis Aware. We have a full website that has all the campaign messages and tools available for our communities to learn more and share resources out. We do have an information hub under our helpful resources and for mentors tab. So right now we do have a number of fact sheets available, and they are labeled to specify whether they're for youth or for adult audiences. And then we also have a number of videos available there for folks to share and view as well. We just wrapped up our media plan, so right now we don't have our posters and social media graphics online quite yet, but those will be coming soon. And here's just some examples of what those materials look like. So on the far left there is an example of a youth-facing fact sheet. So the fact sheets are a page of a photo and color on the front side, and then on the back side is where they have their content. So the middle example there is an example of our safe storage handout for youth audiences. And then on the right, we have a preview of one of our videos. These were really popular. They're kind of that short form video, just 15 seconds that we were able to promote on TikTok and other channels. And those are really popular to share out. So with our media plan just wrapping up, it was the span of about 8 weeks. We did have various ads running in the Twin Cities metro as well as greater Minnesota. And we use paid social media. So again, using TikTok, Snapchat. We also use meta channels like Facebook and Instagram. We did some digital display, so had ads kind of pop up on commonly visited websites. Connected TV was a really interesting platform to use, where our videos would pop up as commercials when folks were streaming on services like Hulu, Disney Plus, and ESPN. And then our 6 vendors did some really amazing community outreach. They would attend community events and table with resources. We had some radio ads running. We had a number of interviews on Hmong TV and some local news channels. And then also our vendor who was tailoring messages to Black and African American communities recommended transit posters, which we had posted up throughout the Twin Cities metro. And so, some analytics that we received from our campaign thus far, we were super excited to get these just within this last week. So, you all are amongst the first group of people to be seeing these analytics. TikTok was our method that had the biggest reach. So, we had over 240,000 teens and young adults reach through this platform. Really great engagement with our click-through rate, well above the industry benchmark. And we had just over 6,100 folks visit the website as a result of seeing these videos on TikTok. Snapchat was another great platform that we used, again, sharing the same videos on here. I wanted to highlight this method just because it didn't have as much of a reach as TikTok, but it had significantly more web visit traffic as a result of seeing the ads on here. So just under 10,000 users visited the website from this push alone. And then connected TV, again, another, the impressions or reach for this one is a little bit lower, and that doesn't surprise us just because it's kind of a one-time engagement that pops up during those streaming services. But we found it to be really beneficial because it can target your young adult audience, but also your influential adults, possibly at the same time if they're sitting down watching a show or streaming, using a streaming service together. And that can kind of potentially inspire those conversations or that organic conversation to happen more naturally, and then kind of talk that through and possibly check out the website further as a result. So some key takeaways and opportunities. This is all from just our Twin Cities Metro campaign. We found that social media platforms had the best engagement overall versus all the channels that we used. If we decide to do this work moving forward, we should consider potentially creating more videos just so that we have a nice, good rotation of what folks are seeing on their screens across platforms. Overall, we did see that on average, usually a person would come across our ads 3 to 5 times over the course of 8 weeks, which is really great in communications work because we know it kind of takes a couple times for either folks to actually read the message or digest the information or take action with the communication by visiting our website. And then lastly, just emphasizing that importance of using mixed media approaches so that you're kind of expanding your reach and having the potential to reach as many people as possible. And then real quickly, I want to highlight our Greater Minnesota campaign efforts. They used a lot of similar platforms with digital display and Meta, really great reach numbers through those engagements. And then they also decided to do an email newsletter as well, which had really great open rates and click rates. So just highlighting that as well, and we were really appreciative of being able to expand the campaign to all areas across Minnesota. And then my last little piece that I wanted to share is so Be Cannabis Aware. The media plan has ended. Our contracts with our vendors will end at the end of this month. However, this is just the beginning of this really essential and important work. We're now going to be pivoting over to some audience research and message development and testing, continuing with our youth audiences, but also including the audience I mentioned earlier around pregnant individuals or individuals who are breastfeeding or chest feeding. So we're going to be conducting a number of focus groups and one-on-one interviews with community members, and also influencing community partners. So thinking about local public health, nonprofit organizations, and others who work closely with these audiences so that we can continue to develop messages, do some trusted messenger mapping and capacity building to figure out the best ways to share out these messages with our community and continue to foster cannabis education and prevention. And from there, our vendor that we're working with will create a final report out and provide recommendations on how to implement those findings moving forward. So that work is currently in the process, and we're super excited to see what we learn from this project and what may take shape as a result of that. If we'll continue to do a campaign or build off of Be Cannabis Aware, maybe it's providing more education to providers. We're really flexible and open with what this work will look like. And we are going to provide our email here, which I can also provide in the chat for folks as well. If you're interested in learning more either about Be Cannabis Aware or the audience research project, or would like to participate in some focus groups or one-on-one interviews yourself, feel free to reach out to us to learn more, and we'd be happy to follow up with you. But with that, that is my piece, and thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Jade. There was one question that came in that is specific to this program, so I thought I would ask it to you now. What type of outcome analysis or effectiveness data do you think is possible or plausible to collect through this campaign?
It's a really great question. I would say for this campaign, what's tricky when it comes to communications is around public awareness and kind of that, yeah, more of our metrics are going to be around awareness and reach versus when we're taking on various prevention efforts. It's really important to always kind of have a mixed approach so that community engagement and outreach, also coordinating efforts, in the schools and the communities. I think communications alone isn't going to, of course, solve all the things in prevention work, but it can open up the door and start that conversation and lead to those further efforts that would complement and further foster prevention and reducing substance use all around. So I would say for this, a lot of our metrics, again, we're focused on that awareness piece and reach. And I'll be really curious to learn moving forward through our audience research, how we can deepen those efforts and possibly shift to go beyond awareness, outcomes and shifting that more to actually seeing that reduce over time. Um, and measure that impact over time. It's so hard when it's a short-term campaign. And so I'm really excited to continue this work and see where those evaluation metrics lead us.
Great. Thanks, Jade. And I'll acknowledge we do have one other question in the Q&A box, but we're going to hold it till the end because we think it can also be asked of other speakers too. So thanks so much, Jade. We'll move on to our next presenter right now is Dave Boxam, who is a communication specialist in the Office of Traffic Safety and the Minnesota Department of Public Safety. He'll be joined by Shannon Graybow, the Grant and Program Supervisor at the Office of Traffic Safety, to talk about recent media and traffic safety messaging efforts around cannabis.
All right, thank you. I'll find my video button there. All right. Thank you, Catherine. Yeah, Shannon and I are excited to talk with you and share what's been going on in the world of Department of Public Safety and Office of Traffic Safety in terms of communications efforts around cannabis and drug impaired in general and impaired in general. And we're excited for your help. You are partners and stakeholders, and we need your help to get the word out. So we're excited to share what's going on and get your help on this. So first off, just kind of the outline of what we'll cover today. Talk about a little about building upon the foundation. Like, what are some things that don't change, right? What are the important things that we want to build upon? How has the landscape changed over the years? And what does that mean in terms of impact on how we reach people? What are people's perceptions? How does that affect the communications efforts that we're doing? And then also, how does that get reflected then in terms of cannabis drug impairment specifically? What are the educational best practices we need to do to drive behavior change? Because ultimately, that's what it's about. So first off, very importantly, building upon the foundation. There's one thing that doesn't change as we communicate about cannabis, alcohol, prescription meds, THC, you name it. The call to action message that we want to share and that we all should be sharing consistently is always plan a safe and sober ride. We're not here to judge or look at terms of what people are doing in their free time and for entertainment and how they want to relax. What we do care about is when that intersects with traffic safety. Those choices, how does that intersect with traffic safety, and what are the behaviors we want to see? So always plan a safe and sober ride is that foundational message that never changes. But what does change is how we adapt additional messaging. So based on what we're seeing on the environment, what's changing in terms of substances that law enforcement's running into, statistics, crash stats, legalizations we have now in Minnesota. And then the research, looking at what consumer research, what are the perceptions out there that people have about cannabis, other drugs versus alcohol, and how does that affect what we do?
So I'm going to talk a little bit about the changing landscape that we've all been navigating all together, all of us. Obviously, it's always been about alcohol in previous years. We talk about drunk driving. I mean, everything, all of our campaigns were all about drunk driving and having those behaviors, addressing that. But we've really had to adapt that. And thankfully, we've seen a ton of progress. We've come a long way. Statutes have changed. The design of cars has been improved. Alcohol is still a concern, always will be a concern, but we are encouraged by the progress, but we obviously have quite a bit more work to do with some of the messages that we need to adapt to. Next, Dave. So we've adapted our messaging from impaired driving to basically just impaired is impaired, regardless of the substance. Obviously, we've had legalization of cannabis. We've had an increase in DUIs with polysubstance and drug-related abuse. There's been a number of things that people are on, whether it's cannabis or whatever it might be, prescription drugs. But the changing landscape is that essentially our message is the same. Impaired is impaired. NHTSA came out with that campaign. If you feel different, you drive different. That was great. We weave that into some of our messaging as well. It's a great compliment. But overall, our theme is driving high as a DWI. So when we started to adapt, we wanted to see what the perceptions about driving high versus driving drunk. And this was really, really interesting. There's been a shift between alcohol and driving, meaning people understand they can't drive drunk. It is socially not acceptable to drive drunk anymore. That's not necessarily the same. We're not at the same point with cannabis. We're not at that same level of concern when people are driving with cannabis. Some of the research that we've been looking at, consumers don't believe cannabis negatively affects their driving, whether when it's alcohol and they're driving over the legal limit, 95% consider this to be a very extremely dangerous behavior. And again, cannabis, driving within an hour of consuming cannabis, only 69% consider this to be very dangerous. So this is what kind of hits home for me. So we took this out of the Minnesota driver attitude and behavior study. So this was a Minnesota survey. Really, it's not an old survey, September of 2022. When you look at, or when we looked at what people were saying, when the question is asked, how dangerous do you think it is for someone to drive within 2 hours after consuming marijuana? We've got 20% that either think it's not dangerous at all, or they don't know. That's quite alarming. So when we're looking at how we're going to craft our messaging, we're looking at that 20%. They truly don't believe it's dangerous, or they don't know if it's dangerous. So that's where our messages are going to start to hit. So another question, to the best of your knowledge, can drivers who are impaired by medications or drugs be arrested? Some of them either don't know or don't think it is. So here's an alarming 31% that are saying, yeah, no, I don't really think it is. So that's where our target demographic is going to be hitting. So that's really good for us to know. Next.
So in looking at that research that Shannon was sharing, how does that tie in then in terms of best practices for how you reach people? How do you get people to make sure they're making the right choices and changing dangerous behaviors? And I want to give a shout out to the Spratler group for this, because they did a report, very thorough report on what's going on across the country in terms of people's perceptions, kind of what Shannon was hitting on too, in terms of their views of cannabis, their views compared to alcohol, the dangers, the lack of what they think are dangers, what are their perceptions? And then what are states doing about it? How are they educating? And what are then some best practices that states should be doing to help address those perceptions, change dangerous behaviors? So shout out to them, because what we've done is we've taken a number of these recommendations, and that drives what we're doing here in Minnesota in terms of our earned media and advertising. So for example, the approach, never stereotype or ridicule. This isn't the days of, Cheech and Chong and Jeff Spicoli at Fast Times where we're kind of making fun. It's all great and funny to be high and stoned and stuff. It's like, we don't want to portray people who are cannabis consumers as those types of people. It's not like, oh, they're a bunch of stoners. And it's like, because that's offensive. And it kind of hits back at what Jade was talking about too. We need to address, they could be lawyers, teachers, what have you. This isn't back in the olden days in terms of how we view cannabis consumption. The myths, dispel myths that cannabis doesn't affect my driving. And we see that with some of the research too, that it's like, oh, I don't know, maybe I'm a safer driver. So we want to dispel those myths and get at the dangers and be factual on that. Be truthful, straightforward, not getting into the fear and shaming. Again, kind of, that's interesting what Jade was sharing too on that. We're not here to judge. We're here to what's the intersection with traffic safety and what do we want people to do if you're choosing to consume these different substances. The law enforcement piece. The law enforcement piece matters. we need to talk about education, but we need to talk about enforcement. But it needs to be within a certain context. And what's going to resonate based on this study and approaches is, what's the training of law enforcement? Can they detect this stuff? What are they doing to try to get dangerous, impaired drivers off the road? So if you're communicating that in this context, that is beneficial, and people will respond to that and appreciate that. So here at DPS and Office of Traffic Safety, kind of some buckets of what we've been doing. So we'll hit on kind of the earned media efforts, the media relations, that type of stuff, organic messaging, your social, the website stuff, paid media efforts, which is like the advertising, and then partner resources. What are the resources that we are making available to you, and we need you to share to get the word out. So with cannabis specifically, as Shannon talked about on the navigation part of it, the messaging evolved in terms of, first it was alcohol, then we kind of got into impaired is impaired, right? We don't care what the substance is. And leading up to cannabis legalization, there was a lot of media relations that we did leading up to it, a lot of interest before the legalization date hit. And then once it, shortly before, we ended up doing a news conference and lots of interviews. And if you look at some of the language here and you think about the best practices and approaches, you can see we're tying into that, right? So you look at the headline from CBS News, law enforcement on alert for impaired drivers, plan to boost drug experts. So there are drug recognition evaluators, DREs, that are specifically trained to identify a person who is impaired by drugs. And regular law enforcement gets training as well. So you notice that we're tying in that piece of what's the law enforcement part of it. They're trained on this. They know what to look for. This isn't catching anybody off guard or by surprise here in Minnesota. We know what to do. Law enforcement knows what to do. And is the lack of knowledge on, well, can I get arrested when I'm under influence of drugs? Yep, you can. We hit on it right away in all our messaging. So example, the news release up top, it's illegal to operate a motorboat, vehicle, what have you, if you are impaired, regardless of the substance. Another thing real quick, if you look at the headline, the story KTTC. So there's an effort that was a year or two later, a pilot project that OTS worked on with State Patrol and drug recognition experts across the state, where they're piloting these new oral roadside devices. With alcohol, there's a preliminary breath test, right? And you can check for impairment. That doesn't exist with cannabis. But what does exist are these devices where they can detect roadside if a person is impaired by different drug categories. So for example, cannabis, it can detect if there's the intoxicating substance. Not if I smoked weed 3 weeks ago. That doesn't come up. It's if it's the impairing substance is in there, the element is in there. So we conducted these roadside tests, and we got a lot of good media attention around that too. Again, weaving in the law enforcement piece. What's law enforcement doing about it? What's their expertise? What are we doing to save lives? The goal is to hopefully get this approved by legislation lawmakers in the next session. So that's the goal. These are not out on the road yet. Looking at kind of the social piece. So for example, social media, if you feel different, you drive different. We talk about law enforcement being aware. They can look for things. They know what to look for. Driving highs at DWI, hitting at that perception that, oh, I don't know, maybe I won't get busted. State Fair is a great opportunity where when cannabis was legalized, we had our DPS booth in the education building, actually. And the theme of that booth was pretty much cannabis and impairment. And we had different tactics and techniques of spinning wheels and handouts of frisbees and wristbands and such, where we were able to engage with people stopping by the booth, all about cannabis, all about impairment and answering questions and such. So it was very beneficial. The Office of Cannabis Management, we work with them in terms of running maybe some concepts by them that we're planning to do, just to get their feedback. Are we hitting on the mark on that? And they link to our materials, Q&A on our website, other things like that helped get the word out.
All right. So Dave was talking a lot about the earned media, and I'm going to pivot and talk a little bit more about what we're doing with the paid advertising. Again, our messaging being driving high is a DWI. That's the foundational message that we have. We have lots of different taglines, but foundationally, driving high is a DWI. And remember, you guys are, the choir that we speak to, and we all know that, but we've got a percentage of people that don't believe that they could get arrested for DWI just by being high. So that is, again, what our tagline always will be, is driving high as a DWI. So we brought these messages right to the consumer where they're likely buying the products that they're using, whether it's cannabis products or other things. We bring it right to the consumer. So it could be a convenience store, smoke shop, dispensary, and this is quite the emerging market right now. Our signage also ends up in liquor stores because we've got THC beverages now as well. So whether it's a table tent, a poster, or just a sign like you see in one of those convenience stores, or certainly right on your smartphone. There's lots of ways we're going to be getting that message, but we bring it right to you. So what you're looking at here are some concepts. So when we were developing some concepts, we had our creative agency looking at what types of messages are going to work and not just not just resonate with our audience, but actually change their behavior. So they give us several concepts to look at, and here's a couple of them. This is called On Cannabis, which is a mix of static and video, and we rolled out on the static side. And so what you're seeing is that on cannabis, that's one of the concept. So you're basically saying on this, you can have your hands on a cheeseburger. You can have your hands on a remote control. You can have your hands on a gaming device, but not on the wheel. So these are some of the messages that we create, or what we were creating. Go ahead, next. So this is the really interesting part too. So we do some message testing with our demographic. So our creative agency gave us 4 concepts. The one that I just showed you is what our demographic likes. That's the one, not only do they like, but we're interested in, not only do you like it, but is it going to change your behavior? So some of these other ones, so that we got the video and the static, what's highlighted in green over there at 47% on the right side, that's the hands-on. That's what's going, how likely are you to change your behavior? Not do you like it, not does it resonate with you, are you going to change your behavior? How likely? So we basically are using those messages that they're telling us are going to change our behavior. And on the static side, again, on cannabis, 42%, that's what we're moving with. So that's what we move forward with, is what our demographic tells us. So I want people to know we're not just the ones in the Office of Communications or at DPS thinking about what we like or don't like. We want to hear from our target demographic. This one is negative reaction versus a positive reaction. Again, same type of results here. The hands-on had more of a positive reaction, and what got negative is the canna bliss, which is not a concept I showed you, but you can see we've got some reactions from our demographic, and that's why we use the messages that we do.
So what does this look like in terms of us needing your help, right? And spreading the word. Where can you find resources? And how can we have that consistent messaging that's going to repeat in people's minds and pick up on that because they see it all over the place, and we're all working together to spread it. So the DPS website, if you've been on our site, we love it. It's way better than it used to be, way more intuitive, we like to think. So in terms of finding materials, where can you go? Right away on the OTS landing page, we have the I want to, search for things. We have pre-created buttons where it's like, I'd like some promotional materials, or I'd like to find some communications materials. Those buttons exist to get you right there. And once you click through to that, if you're familiar and working with us, we provide a variety of partner materials on our big campaigns, and even on some of the other things that are maybe not campaign specific, but important messages that people need to be aware of. So different outreach materials. So of course, on the drug to driving and cannabis, that's going to be weaved into our Drive Sober or Get Pulled Over campaigns, and those materials are available. What does that look like? When we have campaigns that we're promoting, we'll create a template news release you can use. We create talking points that you can weave into your own communications that your own spokespeople can use. Sample social media posts. So at the moment, as we talk about, again, impaired is impaired. We don't care about the substance. We want people to be aware that if anything is impairing, we don't want you to get behind the wheel. But if you look at some of the materials we provide, so for example, on the right-hand side, the social stuff, that's stuff that we'll pre-create for you. You can repurpose it yourself. We'll work to kind of weave in some more, cannabis related messaging, but we'll weave in driving high overall as well, and a Dropbox link that you can access different images as well. The FAQ on the Office of Traffic Safety site, lots of good information in there. I mean, it gets into specifics. It's like, well, how much can I have in my car? And does law enforcement know how to pull over people? What products are legal? Just very good information that you can use in your own communications and reaching Minnesotans.
Okay, and so we really need to wrap this up. We're over on time here, Dave. So I'm just going to quickly go through what we have available. So this, you're looking at a link to our order site. You can find this on the DPS website under partner information. And yes, we can link this to the presentation, I believe, Steph. Really quick, we have a number of things here's some examples of some clings and table tents. Our goal is to be more diligent about adding more materials to make available for your distribution. The yellow stuff is not on the site yet, but it will be shortly. That's what we're currently developing, but others are already on there. Follow us on social, share your messages, DPS and OTS social channels, opportunity to share our messages and add your own message. This is kind of getting back to a little bit of what Jade was talking about. And again, I want to just wrap this up really quickly. Frequency and reach. Why should you use our materials? Because when we look at some of the Pew research that's been done, a trusted direct source link, like a news outlet, fosters higher source content recall than a social media or share. That doesn't mean don't share our stuff, but our consumers want a direct source and they're going to trust that. So why use our stuff? We've got a DPS brand that's strong, and your communities you are the experts. You guys are the trusted source within your community. So you guys posting and sharing our stuff, we've got now 2 trusted sources. So what does this mean for our messaging? We want to enhance this content recognition, message retention, and trust by distributing consistent branded collateral. So I know we need to keep wrapping up here, so I do appreciate your time here, and Dave and I will be available later for some questions.
Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. And finally, we have Sarah McGeary Dahan and Bill Vancouvering with us today. Both serve as TZD regional coordinators, Sarah in the southwest part of our state and Bill in the east central part of our state. And they'll be sharing examples and tools that they use when engaging with the public through education activities. And I think they should be on soon.
Sarah, I can see your slides, but I can't hear anything if you're talking or see you via video.
Sorry, I'm just having a little bit of trouble here sharing again. Can you see the presentation?
I can see the presentation. I can also see the thumbtacks on the left side. Yep. What if you hit that little on the lower right corner? That little icon just next to the lower volume that looks like a screen. Nope, to the left. Yep, right there. What happens if you click that?
There. You got that?
Yep, now that works. I can see it.
All right. Sorry about that. I'm Sarah McGarry DeHaan, and I just want to talk to you along with Bill Van Vancovering about TZD and the mission that we have throughout the state of Minnesota. And our mission is to reduce traffic fatalities and serious injuries out on Minnesota roadways. Educating the public about the dangers of impaired driving, including cannabis use, like has been previously talked about, is very essential to that mission. Cannabis can impair your judgment, it can impair reaction time, coordination, and increasing the risk of crashes out on the roads. Public awareness helps prevent impaired driving, saving lives and making roads safe for everyone. And education also empowers communities to make that informed, responsible choice when they're out behind the wheel. So we have some educational tools that we use. We have partnered with Fatal Vision Corp. And this right here, the picture you're seeing is the Cannabis Educational Toolkit from Fatal Vision. And it helps simulate the lack of perception and diminished reaction time caused by the recreational THC use. Through a series of activities that I'm going to show you and Bill's going to talk about, participants can explore the dangers of drug use while driving, and it helps us engage them. It helps engage how THC affects essential abilities by demonstrating the impact that it has on short-term memory loss, impaired executive function, altered vision perception, and motor coordination. And how this works, the THC goggle is a tool that we use. It impairs a person's ability to perceive color. Now, I want to note, because this is a question we get asked every single time we use these, that someone under the influence of THC does not lose their ability to distinguish between colors. The feature with the THC goggles makes everything green. We use this feature of the goggle along with specifically designed activities to model some of THC's impairing effects, like the loss of the participant's capacity to make quick and accurate decisions, which can lead to many potential dangerous consequences when they're behind the wheel, especially when they are the impaired driver. No, I'm going to say it again, THC does not cause you to see green, nor does it make you blind to the color red. The green lens is just one component of the THC goggles that helps model the distortion process of the information. As you can see, these mazes here in the picture are what we use when we're out educating people. This is a dry erase maze board, and it works with any of the Fatal Vision, the marijuana THC simulation experience kits, and it helps demonstrate the distortion perception of the visual information that our brain is seeing and then processing back. And it kind of helps them see the distortion of short-term memory. When they're using this, I put one next to it. They do it without the goggles. See how quickly they do it. See how easy it is. The next one you put side by side, and it is when they're wearing the goggles, and they can see the difference. This right here is a mat that we have with the kit, and it demonstrates the dangers of drowsy and distracted driving, along with the THC effects. And it shows how these behaviors can lead to those devastating consequences. And again, the goggles do change, so you're seeing everything green, and you can't differentiate between the green or the red and the orange and some of the colors on the map that you see there. We also use the 4 in the row game. We have 2 participants, one wears the goggles and one doesn't. The goal of this is the first to achieve 4 discs in a row, either red or black, wins. The winning row can be vertical, horizontal, or diagonal. So like I said, one person wears the goggles and another doesn't. And this activity helps demonstrate the effects of THC impairment, including the short-term memory and problem-solving impairment and just completing simple tasks like 4 in a row. And they can see the participants that are watching, maybe their turn is next, they can see how somebody that is wearing the goggles is maybe slower and can't quite make those decisions like the one next to them who doesn't have the goggles on. Bill?
Hello, I'm Bill Vancouvering, and I am the East Central TZD coordinator. And here are a few photos showcasing these tools in action at a TZD event across Minnesota. You can set these up by contacting your TZD coordinators, and we can help you get these events set up. We're seeing strong engagement from the public, and these interactions continue to provide valuable opportunities to educate communities that while cannabis is now legal, it is still illegal and dangerous. To use it and drive impaired, these tools are helping us spark important conversations that reinforce safety messages and promote responsible choices at events throughout the state. We also partner with local law enforcement and local public health to enhance the education of these different things. And as you can see, these are different events that we've done around around Minnesota. Let's see. These other tools that we have, you'll see we have a pedal cart that people can use these goggles with. We have a beanbag toss. We also have our distracted driving equipment, which you can see there. We use all of these for different forms and events. The Minnesota Safety Council's marijuana myths one-pager found in their on the Move Traffic Safety Guide is useful educational tool for presentations and outreach. And we hand these out at all the events with the simple message that impairment is impairment, no matter the substance. Driving under the influence of marijuana and is it dangerous and illegal. I will add the link into the chat for this, but you can find it at drivesafeminnesota.org, or you can find it at minnesotasafetycouncil.org.
As you can see in this picture, there's a sign, they're called digital message signboards, and they are on state highways to share important safety messages to the public. Minnesota TZD does utilize these. We have something called Message Mondays, and we do them every week. This actually was taken this week by me. I wasn't driving, but it says don't drive high, which happened to be this week's Message Monday was actually on cannabis. And the Message Mondays are part of our Message Monday campaigns, and these messages are distributed to Safe Roads Coalitions, MnDOT, and local communities. Here are some resources and websites where you can find information that anyone can use to educate the public on impaired driving. Minnesota TZD, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, known as NHTSA, and the Minnesota Safety Council. You can also reach out to any of the TZD coordinators. Our information is on the TZD website, and we will share that link as well. I know that was pretty quick. I know we were a little short on time, but I think now we're going to be doing some Q&A questions.
Great, thank you. Yes, it is now time for questions and answers. There is the Q&A box down at the bottom of your screen. We have a few questions in there, but you can go ahead and continue to add to that section as well so that we can answer your questions. I can start with the first one, and Jade has already answered it for her program, but I do think it's interesting for everyone's work that happened here, or that was described here about kind of the evidence that you used for this. I mentioned at the beginning, this is a fairly new topic. Not that cannabis hasn't been around, but that it's becoming legal and so across the country, really. And some states have already been working with this for a while, like Colorado and Oregon. So they're curious about the evidence that has been used to inform these campaigns and these activities, and how you went about learning from these other states like Colorado, Oregon, and Washington come to mind as some of the three front runners.
Yeah, I can jump in, Shannon, too, on on some of the DPS, how that plays with DPS. As we shared in the presentation with that report that the Spratler group did. I mean, that was a fantastic report that kind of compiled what different states are doing and what's working, what's not working. And what's interesting is, and that's tied into the approaches that are recommended and what we're weaving in, is Colorado, for example. Catherine, you mentioned them. Way back in the day when they first started, they were kind of like guinea pigs, right? And when cannabis became legal. And I remember being at, it might have been a GHSA conference. It was a long time ago, but they're rolling out their advertising. And it was funny. It was really funny. But what happened was, I think, was it kind of stereotyped, right? The stoner, and it made you laugh. But what they discovered was like, that's insulting. Like, if I'm a cannabis consumer, don't pigeonhole me into that kind of person, right? I can be a very respectable person and relax with cannabis and not be the stereotype of a stoner, if you will. So that's what gets reflected in terms of what new approaches have been recommended and how to reach people. And as we talked about, how that works in terms of our earned media and interviews, and also on the advertising side and collateral.
And I would just add to that we don't pretend to be the target demographic. We want to go to what they're telling us, and whether or not we use cannabis or not, we want to know what they say, and all of the feedback that we get. We do a lot of message testing. We don't obviously have a budget for it for every campaign that we do, but we're doing a lot more of it, and we take that input, we take that feedback, and that's what you see in any campaign that we're going to be doing. And if something's not performing well, or the click rate is pretty, not performing very well, we take it out and we swap it out with something like that mid-campaign. So the hope is that not only are they receiving our message, but they're actually changing their behavior because of that.
Great, thank you.
Bill, could I interrupt with a question from the chat? I think, Bill, you were mentioning this. Where on the drivesafemn.org website can someone find that one-page informational flyer? Could you drop a more specific link into chat for us? Thank you.
Yep.
Great. And while that's happening, a question that came to my mind is, I know at MDH we focused on youth, and DPS and MnDOT seem to be focusing more on driving, of course. Has there been connection with either schools or with driver's ed companies and curricula to incorporate some of these images, messages, or anything like that?
I can answer that from the TZD perspective. Yes, we do talk about it. We have an Impact Teen Driver program, and we talk about everything from wearing your seatbelt, distracted driving, impaired driving, drowsy driving. We encompass everything, and cannabis is also in there. We also bring these goggles to school events, to community events. We have Safe Roads coalitions out in counties, and they are using these at events also. And I saw there was another question in the chat, and I do appreciate this, because I do understand that when we do use these goggles, it does sometimes become a game, especially with the younger groups. They think it's funny, they giggle, they laugh. They do the same thing with the drunk goggles. Yes, we've all experienced it, but how I use it is, if I can partner with law enforcement or a healthcare professional. I'm a nurse at trade. That's my previous job. I bring in some real life stories. I have a clear intent when I'm doing this. Like, this is not a game. I'm trying to, teach you guys how to recognize when you're impaired. We even say, we know it's out there. We know people are using it, but we want you to be safe. So I just have those conversations, but that's kind of what I suggest. Partner with your law enforcement and healthcare and bring it to them that way.
Great, thank you. I'm just looking at the Q&A here. So there's a question about the age range of folks who were asked how dangerous they thought driving after cannabis use is. And they are referencing the second presentation. I think that's yours, Shannon.
Yep.
And Dave, just about the age range that you're speaking about.
I don't know that we had a particular age in that. That was the behavior study that we were looking at. Dave, do you recall
Yeah,
if it was
without looking at the study, we'd have to look at the
right?
study to see what kind of what the particulars were. I'm not sure if that was part of it or not. We could circle back on that and see what kind of the parameters were on that one.
Great, thanks. And then another question, it's similar to, I think, what we just talked about bringing in stories, specifically stories as a nurse, or someone who's been in that space. But the person is asking about bringing in firsthand stories from law enforcement about the dangers of driving under the influence of cannabis to the public. Just commenting that sometimes people need to see for themselves that driving impaired by THC is dangerous.
And go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say we do in all of our campaigns, we try to do some type of personal impact. And before and after our impaired driving campaign, we do ask law enforcement to give us some feedback on what are you seeing. So they do have to report to us what they're doing, like traffic stops and how many DUIs, all that type of thing. But we also ask them to share some egregious behaviors or what is it that they're seeing on the roadway. We often share those on social to let people know, hey, this is, for them, it's an everyday occurrence. For the general public, it's like, oh, yeah, well, somebody was driving and had cannabis on board. They were drunk and had two kids in the car. Well, that might be a daily occurrence for them, but that's brand new information to, I would say, the general motoring public for a lot of people. So we do try to let people know.
Right. And we agree. It's those types of stories that resonate with people. Stats are important. It backs up why we do what we do. Talking heads are important because we're the experts. But if all Minnesotans are hearing our government folks, it's like, yeah, whatever, but when you get those personal impact stories and you get those stories like what Shannon was talking about, what's actually happening on the road, that gets picked up by media, that gets interest on social. And we're always looking for personal impact stories. We haven't, as I recall, I don't think anything specific around cannabis, but we've done a number in the past of different weaving in stories about, in fact, the holiday campaign that's going on right now, the effect of alcohol and what that does to people on the road. We're always looking for their stories because people pay attention to that, and those stories stick.
And such a home run too for us is when we do share messages out on social, whether it's hypothetically, Chisago County having, if we share some information about one of their traffic stops, well, then they put it on theirs, and then some community members share it on theirs, and then our traffic safety partners share it on there, increasing that frequency, increasing that reach. And that's kind of that home run when we're all giving those same messages and we can tie it to some of our campaigns. We give those real world stories, and it really links back to what is that message that they're getting. DWI is it, driving high is a DWI, and what's going to change their behavior.
We also, with TZD, like I said before, we partner with law enforcement. Minnesota State Patrol goes with us into schools for the Impact Teen Driver program. We have them at events with us. We have our local sheriff's departments, our local police departments, and they actually are the ones that do more of that education and more of those real life stories. and can get that impact out to the public. They're great to work with.
I'll just chime in real quick from not so much the law enforcement piece, but just in best practices when reaching youth audiences, we want to just be mindful of always elevating community voice when and where possible. And a great way to do that is engaging the youth in those decisions and allowing them the space and autonomy to share their impact their stories. And I know that can be really tricky. We don't want to ever like corner youth or, make them feel like they have to tell their story. But again, getting back to that near peer audiences, if you're trying to engage and have these messages geared towards youth, having that youth peer speak up about their personal experiences, either with peer pressure, with use, mental health challenges, having that come from the youth voice is always super important. And I know we weren't able to do a ton of that with Be Cannabis Aware, but we're really excited in our next phase of work. We'll have the opportunity to have more of those in-depth qualitative conversations in hopes that we can elevate those experiences and voices in our future messaging moving forward.